So when Mercury is in Scorpio, it brings this quality of intense and penetrating intellect. So Mercury is the intellect that wants to understand how things work, how we, all the details. And Scorpio is a very penetrating sign, but it's more of emotional penetration, and it's an internal reflective quality that, comes to bear when we're dealing with Scorpio energy. So when we see Mercury in Scorpio, I've many times seen where a person is a good writer. They're good at organizing ideas, especially if they can reflect on them and organize them and then put them in a form. It can be very penetrating. A lot of penetrating insight and wisdom can come from this Mercury in Scorpio, especially in the form of things like writing or even, other skills like that, such as editing and other types of creativity where you reflect on something and you ponder it and you think about it. One of the difficult qualities of Mercury in Scorpio is that Scorpio is water sign. And in the moment, our emotions can be hard to manage. And Mercury is really the part of us that's trying to stay flexible and intelligent and creative in the moment, rather than being overwhelmed by emotion. So you want to understand this. It's very important. It's not, when we say that Mercury is speech, it doesn't, speech isn't just, well, there's speech, people talk. No, it means clear speech, and it means what clear and good speech brings into your life as a benefit. When you're around someone who speaks clearly, they're actually saying what they mean. Mercury in Scorpio can definitely speak, but it can distort the speech. It can distort the speech toward what they want emotionally in the moment rather than what they really feel, for example. It can lead to, in fact, I don't want to sound harsh, but you can see where someone could maybe lie because they want to feel good. So, it's not a big deal to kind of say it like that or look for a way. Of course, it doesn't feel like lying. It feels like, well, I have to say this thing if I want this thing. And it'll be very natural for the person to be like, well, but if I say that to you, then you're going to do this. So I don't want this, so I have to say this. I have to tell you this, because if I tell you this thing, which might be the truth, then you're not going to give me what I want. So if I want what I want, I need to say this. But again, that's not what we want. If we're talking to someone and they're talking because they want something from us and they're saying what they need to say, so we'll do what they want us to do, once we realize that wasn't the truth, we feel manipulated. Again, it's very subtle. It happens, all of us do it at times in some way or another. We all have a tendency to do that. Mercury in water signs can tend to do that, not just Scorpio, but in water signs in general, because water signs are motivated to feel good. And Mercury is literally the words we use and how we use them and why we use them. And again, everything is relative. It doesn't mean everybody who has Mercury in Scorpio is going to be manipulating through words, or that that's the only place that happens. Like I said, we all tend to do it. It's something we all need to watch. But what we need to understand is that these are tendencies that in the moment don't feel like that. It doesn't feel like that to the person who's doing it. Let's say someone has, let's just use the example. Let's say someone has Mercury in Scorpio, and a feeling comes up. Maybe it's not because they want something. Maybe it's because they want you to have something. Maybe they say, well, if I tell you that, it's going to hurt your feelings, so I'll tell you this because I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to protect your feelings, so I'll tell you that. That's an example where we kind of excuse it. You see, you have to understand the motivation of Scorpio is to avoid, pain and difficulty. That's not the only thing, but that's a kind of important motivation. It's a tamasic sign which wants to feel strong and powerful, and it's where we feel emotionally vulnerable. And so when planets go into Scorpio, that's kind of a motivation first. It's kind of like the primary motivation at first is to avoid pain, is to avoid emotional pain for ourselves and others. Of course, it's not always selfish. It's not always like lying, deception, because we want to get something that can happen, but it can also be because we want to prevent something from happening here or there. And again, to be honest about it, Scorpio can have a reputation for being somewhat manipulative, and Mercury is the planet that makes it that way. Because again, Mercury is a planet of skill and intelligence, and catching on and saying, okay, I want to get something out of this situation, so I'll say this word, I'll say these words, I'll speak this way. And what can often happen is speak just enough of the truth so that if you're called on it, you can deny it. Oh, that's not what I meant. When it's clear after a while that is what someone perhaps meant. Again, it's not only with Scorpio, and that's not the only way words are used. In the highest sense, like I said, there's a lot of penetrating insight and wisdom that comes from Mercury when it's in Scorpio. But you can see, in certain news cycles or whatever, when Mercury goes through Scorpio, you can see, propaganda can be easily used. You can play on people's fears. Just think about that concept of using language as a way to exploit someone's fears. Or perhaps, bring like a heavy thing onto them. Again, it's not the only thing for sure, because there's a lot of power with Mercury and Scorpio. I've seen a lot of creativity because Scorpio in general is a sign of transformation and intelligence and understanding why things are happening. The difficulty is that Mercury is not an emotional planet. It's a planet of discrimination and detachment. And Scorpio is a sign of emotions and feeling. And so being careful not to use words to injure, to not use words to manipulate or to necessarily feel better, but to clearly communicate what's happening. And again, many times with the Scorpio energy, let's say it's a person who quote is a Scorpio, like they have Scorpio rising. They can over time realize that they've not been so honest with words. So again, the real strength of Mercury in Scorpio is that it can definitely give a lot of penetrating insight, and especially when we're organizing information. If the person has time to think and reflect, and especially connect with the heart, then those more shady sides of Mercury and Scorpio, saying what you think you need to say to get what you want, those kinds of things won't be as present. Again, like with every planet in Scorpio, we need to really be connected to the heart. And with Mercury, for sure. And when the Scorpio person does really connect with the heart, or when Mercury's in Scorpio and the person connects to the heart before they speak, or they make sure that they're really attuned, then the words can shed much penetrating insight. But again, because we can get easily triggered emotionally, that sign of getting emotionally triggered, ruling the function of speech, you can see how that would be, where that could have some difficult qualities. When someone feels threatened, they can use that skill and that intelligence that's also connected to the function of speech as a way to try to kind of win the argument and sort of manipulate the situation rather than speak the truth, which is often hard to come by and often confusing in the moment, because we're not necessarily so sure of the truth when we're emotionally triggered. So, a lot of good qualities with Mercury and Scorpio, but person needs to be really connected with the heart and needs to check in with that first. When that happens, a lot of penetrating insight and wisdom is possible, particularly when words and language are used in a creative way through writing, or even things like counseling. When Scorpios are counseling, they're very much in that space of receiving and then dispensing the truth and then communicating truthfully from a place of depth.